As I walked out with my last suitcase, a farmer handed me a key my mother hid before she died. Before we dive into this story, hit subscribe while you're here. Tomorrow, I'm dropping something that's going to absolutely wreck you in the best way. I was standing in the parking lot of Meadowbrook Group Home, my entire life packed into two suitcases and a backpack, when a man in worn overalls approached me. He was maybe 60 years old, with sun-weathered skin and hands that looked like they'd spent decades working soil. "You're Lily, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Catherine's daughter?" My mother's name hit me like a punch to the chest. Catherine had died when I was 5 years old, and I'd spent the last 13 years in the foster system, bouncing between homes and group facilities. Nobody ever talked about her. The social workers said she'd been sick, that there was no other family, that I should focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on the past. "Yes," I managed to say. "How did you know her?" The farmer reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. "Your mother gave me this 11 years ago. Made me promise to find you when you turned 18 and give it to you myself. Said it was important that I hand it to you personally, not mail it or give it to any social worker." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside was a brass key with a tag attached. Written on the tag in handwriting I didn't recognize were three words: Miller's Storage, Unit 42. "She paid for that storage unit 10 years in advance," the farmer continued. "Made sure it would be waiting for you. I'm Jacob, by the way. I owned the farm next to where your mother lived before she got sick. She was a good woman, Lily. She loved you more than anything." Tears burned in my eyes. "I don't remember much about her." "She knew you wouldn't," Jacob said softly. "That's why she left you this. Whatever's in that unit, she wanted you to have it when you were old enough to understand." He handed me a business card with his phone number. "If you need anything, you call me. Your mother was like family, which means you are too." Then he walked back to his truck, leaving me standing there with a key to a past I'd never known. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, one of those places with rows of identical orange doors and units that smelled like dust and forgotten memories. I took the bus there the next morning, clutching the key so tightly it left an impression in my palm. Unit 42 was in the back corner. My heart pounded as I unlocked it and rolled up the metal door. Inside was a small space, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, filled with carefully organized boxes. Everything was labeled in that same handwriting from the key tag: Lily's baby clothes, family photos, important documents. Letters for Lily. I pulled the box labeled Letters for Lily out first and sat down right there on the concrete floor. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one numbered and dated. I opened number 1 with shaking hands. "My dearest Lily," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've found what I left for you, and I'm so sorry I'm not there to give it to you myself. I'm writing this on your 5th birthday. You're sleeping in the next room, and I can hear you breathing through the baby monitor. The doctors told me today that I have 6 months, maybe less. The cancer is too advanced, too aggressive. I won't see you grow up, won't be there for your first day of school or your graduation or your wedding. But I can do this. I can leave you the truth about who you are and where you come from." I had to stop reading because tears were blurring the words. I wiped my eyes and continued. Your father was a man named Michael. We met when I was 23, working as a waitress in Denver. He was charming and handsome and made me feel like I was the only person in the world. We got married after 6 months, and I got pregnant with you right away. I thought we were happy. I was wrong. Michael had secrets. He was involved in things I didn't understand at first. Financial crimes, fraud, schemes that I didn't learn about until federal agents showed up at our door. He disappeared before they could arrest him, leaving me alone and pregnant. I never saw him again. The government seized everything we had because it was all bought with stolen money. I lost the house, the car, everything except the few personal items they let me keep. I moved to a small town called Riverside, about 3 hours from Denver, and started over. I worked 2 jobs while pregnant with you, saved every penny, and tried to build a life. When you were born, I promised myself you'd never know about your father's crimes, never carry that shame. You were innocent, perfect, mine. The letter went on to explain how my mother had worked herself to exhaustion, providing for us, how she'd kept us afloat on minimum wage jobs and sheer determination, how she'd started feeling sick when I was 4, but ignored it because she couldn't afford to miss work or pay for doctors. By the time she finally went to the hospital, it was too late. I spent the next 6 hours in that storage unit reading every letter. There were 52 of them, one for each year she'd hoped I'd live. In them, she told me everything about her own childhood in foster care, about the mistakes she'd made, about how much she loved me, and how sorry she was that she couldn't stay. But the letters weren't the only things in the unit. There were photo albums filled with pictures of me as a baby and toddler, smiling and happy in my mother's arms. There were my baby clothes, carefully preserved in plastic bins. There were report cards from my preschool, artwork I'd made, a lock of my hair from my first haircut. My mother had saved everything, every memory, every moment, every piece of evidence that I had been loved completely and absolutely, in a box labeled important. Documents, I found her will, medical records, and a thick folder marked for Lily when she's ready. Inside was information about my father, his real name, which wasn't Michael, photographs of him, newspaper articles about his arrest years later in another state. He was in prison now, serving 20 years for wire fraud and money laundering. There was also a letter she'd written but never sent to him, telling him about me, asking if he wanted to be part of my life. She'd decided not to mail it, she explained in a note attached to it, because she realized I deserved better than a father who'd only hurt me. At the very bottom of the box was a bank book. My mother had opened a savings account in my name when I was born and deposited $25 every month, even when she was sick, even when she could barely afford food. Over 5 years, she'd saved $1,500. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything she had, and she'd left it for me. I sat in that storage unit until the sun started to set, surrounded by my mother's love made tangible. For 13 years, I'd believed I came from nothing, that I'd been abandoned by people who didn't care. But I'd been wrong. My mother had cared so much that she'd spent her final months creating this treasure chest of memories and truth, making sure I'd know her even after she was gone. The next day, I called Jacob. "Can we meet?" I asked. "I want to know more about my mother." He invited me to his farm, a sprawling property with fields of corn and a red barn that looked like it had been standing for 100 years. His wife, Martha, welcomed me with a hug and homemade pie, treating me like I'd always been part of their family. Your mother lived in the little house at the end of our road, Jacob explained as we sat on their porch. She rented it from us when she moved to Riverside. You were just a baby then, maybe 3 months old. She was struggling, working herself to death, but she never complained. Martha nodded, her eyes soft with memory. We had a daughter about your mother's age who'd moved away for college. When we saw Catherine trying to do everything alone with a new baby, we stepped in. I'd watch you while she worked, and Jacob would bring over vegetables from the garden. We became close. She was proud, Jacob continued. Didn't like accepting help, but she did it for you. She'd have done anything for you, Lily. They told me stories I'd never heard. How my mother used to sing to me every night, the same lullaby her own mother had sung to her before she died. How I'd taken my first steps in their kitchen, walking toward a cookie Martha was holding. How my mother had cried when she got her diagnosis, not for herself, but because she wouldn't see me grow up. She made me promise to watch over you, Jacob said quietly, to make sure you got that key when you turned 18. She knew the system would take you, knew there was nothing she could do to prevent it, but she wanted you to have the truth when you were old enough to handle it. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. Martha disappeared into the house and came back with a photo album. We took pictures whenever you and Catherine came over. She didn't have a camera, so we made copies for her, but we kept the originals, thinking maybe someday you'd want them. The album was filled with moments I'd forgotten or never knew existed. Me as a toddler helping Jacob feed chickens, my mother laughing in a way I'd never seen in the few photos the social workers had given me. Birthday parties in Martha's kitchen with homemade cakes, decorated with wobbly frosting flowers. Halloween costumes sewn from old sheets. Christmas mornings with presents wrapped in newspaper comics. She was happy here, Martha said. Even when she was sick, even when things were hard, she'd look at you and smile like you were the sun itself. I couldn't stop crying. These people, virtual strangers who'd known my mother for such a short time, had loved us both enough to keep our memory alive for 13 years. The house she rented, I asked. Does anyone live there now? Jacob and Martha exchanged a look. No, Jacob said slowly. We've kept it empty since she died. Couldn't bring ourselves to rent it to anyone else. It felt wrong somehow. Would you like to see it? Martha asked gently. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms with chipped paint and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. But as soon as I stepped inside, something shifted in my chest. The furniture was gone, but I recognized the layout from some deep, buried memory. The kitchen window that looked out onto Jacob's fields, the corner of the living room where my mother had set up my toy box, the bedroom where she'd rocked me to sleep. We kept the utilities on, Jacob admitted, just in case. The rent your mother paid up front covered about 5 years, and after that, well, we didn't need the money. Martha always said we were keeping it for you, even though we didn't know if you'd ever come back. I walked through each room slowly, trying to remember. There were ghosts here, but they were good ones. My mother singing in the kitchen, me laughing as she chased me down the hallway. The 2 of us curled up together on a couch that no longer existed, reading picture books I'd found in the storage unit. I want to stay, I said suddenly. If you'd let me rent it, I have the money from the savings account, and I can get a job and— Lily, Martha interrupted gently, you're not renting anything. This house has been waiting for you. It's yours if you want it. Over the next few weeks, I moved my life into the little house at the end of Jacob and Martha's road. They helped me clean and paint, brought over furniture they weren't using, and introduced me to everyone in Riverside. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and they all remembered my mother. The woman who owned the diner, Sarah, had worked with my mother years ago. Catherine was the hardest worker I ever knew, she said, offering me a job on the spot. And she talked about you constantly. Her whole world revolved around that little girl who called her mama. The librarian, Patricia, showed me the children's section where my mother had brought me every week for story time. You loved the books about animals, she said. Your mother would check out 10 at a time and read them to you over and over until you had them memorized. Even the doctor who treated my mother in her final months remembered us. She was terrified of leaving you alone, Dr. Hayes told me, but she was also determined to make sure you'd be okay. She spent her last weeks writing those letters, organizing that storage unit, making arrangements. She died knowing she'd done everything she could to give you a foundation. I got a job at Sarah's diner, working the same shifts my mother had worked years before. The work was hard, the pay wasn't great, but it felt right somehow. I was walking in her footsteps, understanding the sacrifices she'd made. In the evenings, I'd read more of her letters. She'd written about her dreams for me, hoping I'd go to college, find work I loved, meet someone who treated me with respect and kindness. She'd written about her regrets, wishing she'd left my father sooner, wishing she'd taken better care of her health. But mostly, she'd written about love, how being my mother was the best thing she'd ever done, how every difficult moment was worth it just to see me smile. I found a community college nearby and enrolled in classes using the rest of the trust money. My mother had wanted me to have an education, and I was going to honor that wish. I studied social work, thinking about all the kids like me in the system who needed someone to fight for them. Jacob and Martha became the grandparents I'd never had. We had dinner together twice a week, and Martha taught me to cook, using recipes she'd shared with my mother. Jacob showed me how to grow vegetables in the small garden behind the house, telling me stories about teaching my mother the same things. One afternoon, about 6 months after I'd moved to Riverside, Martha asked me to help her go through some boxes in their attic. "We're getting old," she said. "Need to downsize before we can't manage the stairs anymore." In one of the boxes, I found a wooden jewelry box I'd never seen before. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small locket. "Oh," Martha breathed, "that was your mother's. She left it here the last time she visited, about a week before she went into hospice. Said she wanted us to keep it safe for you." I opened the locket. Inside were 2 tiny pictures, one of me as a baby, one of my mother holding me. On the back was an engraving, "For Lily, my greatest gift." I wore that necklace every day, feeling connected to the mother I'd barely known, but who'd loved me with a fierceness that transcended death. A year after finding the storage unit, I was working at the diner when a man in his 50s came in. He looked uncomfortable, nervous, and he kept glancing at me, while pretending to read the menu. Finally, he approached the counter. "Are you Lily?" he asked. "Catherine's daughter?" My stomach tightened. "Who's asking?" "My name is Robert," he said. "I was your mother's brother, your uncle." I stared at him, trying to process this information. "I didn't know she had a brother. She never mentioned family." Robert's face crumpled slightly. "We were estranged, had been for years after a stupid fight about nothing important. When I heard she was sick, I tried to reconnect, but she'd already gone into hospice. By the time I found out where she was, it was too late. She'd already passed." He pulled out his wallet and showed me a picture of two children, a girl about 10 and a boy about 7. "This is Catherine and me when we were kids. We grew up in foster care together, got separated when we were teenagers. I spent years trying to find her after I aged out, and when I finally did, we had 5 good years before we fought and stopped speaking. I've regretted that fight every day since." I looked at the photo, seeing my mother's eyes in the young girl's face. "Why are you here now?" "Because I want to know my niece," Robert said simply. "I know I have no right to ask that I wasn't there when you needed family, but I'd like to try to be part of your life now, if you'll let me." Catherine would have wanted that. I didn't answer right away. Part of me was angry that he'd stayed away, that he'd let pride or stubbornness or whatever it was keep him from reconciling with my mother before she died. But another part of me understood. People made mistakes. They let fear or ego get in the way of what mattered. And sometimes they tried to make things right, even when it was too late to fix everything. "I'm off in an hour," I finally said. "We can talk then." Over coffee, Robert told me about my mother's childhood, filling in gaps her letters hadn't covered, how they'd survived the foster system by looking out for each other, how Catherine had been the brave one, always standing up to bullies and protecting younger kids, how they'd promised to find each other after they aged out and actually managed to do it. "She met your father a year after we reconnected," Robert said. I didn't trust him, told her he was bad news. We fought about it, and she chose him. We didn't speak after that. I was angry, self-righteous, convinced I was right. And I was right about him, but I was wrong to cut her off. By the time I realized that, she was gone. He wiped his eyes. "I failed her, Lily, but I don't want to fail you. If you'll give me a chance, I'd like to be the uncle I should have been all along." Robert became part of my life slowly, carefully, earning trust rather than demanding it. He lived 2 hours away, but visited every few weeks, bringing small gifts and sharing more stories about my mother. He'd kept photos and letters from their time together, and he gave them all to me, adding to the collection in the storage unit. He also told me about extended family I didn't know existed. Cousins, aunts, uncles who'd lost touch over the years, but would welcome me if I wanted to meet them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. I had roots, connections, a history that went back generations. On what would have been my mother's 45th birthday, I organized a small gathering at the house. Jacob and Martha came, along with Robert, Sarah from the diner, Patricia from the library, and a handful of people who'd known Catherine. We shared stories, looked at photos, and celebrated a woman who'd given everything to make sure her daughter had a chance at a good life. "She'd be so proud of you," Martha said, hugging me as the sun set. "Look at what you've built here, the life you're creating. That's what she wanted for you." Standing in that little house, surrounded by people who loved me. I felt my mother's presence so strongly, it was almost physical. She was in every corner of this place, in every memory these people shared, in the way they'd welcomed me and made me part of their community. The storage unit key had unlocked more than just a metal door. It had unlocked the truth about who I was, where I came from, and how deeply I'd been loved. My mother had given me the greatest gift possible, not wealth or possessions, but knowledge. The knowledge that I mattered, that I was wanted, that even when life took everything from us, love survived. I continued reading her letters in order, one each year on my birthday like she'd intended. Each one offered wisdom, encouragement, and love that reached across death to guide me. On my 19th birthday, she wrote about finding your purpose. On my 20th, about forgiving yourself for mistakes. Each letter was a gift, a conversation with a mother I'd lost too soon, but who'd never really left me. I graduated from community college with honors and got accepted to a university 50 miles away to finish my bachelor's degree in social work. I commuted from the house, unwilling to leave the place where I finally felt I belonged. I worked with foster kids during my internships, helping them navigate a system I knew too well. Some of them reminded me of myself, angry and scared and convinced nobody cared. I'd show them my mother's letters, tell them my story, and watch something shift in their eyes. Maybe they weren't as alone as they thought. Maybe someone out there was fighting for them, even if they couldn't see it yet. Jacob and Martha got older, moving slower, but still insisting on Sunday dinners and garden advice. Robert brought his own family to visit, and I gained cousins who embraced me without hesitation. The community of Riverside wrapped around me like the warm blanket my mother had tucked me into as a child. The house that had waited 13 years for me became a home. I painted the walls in colors my mother would have loved, planted flowers in the garden, and filled the rooms with laughter and life. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in the rocking chair Martha had given me and read my mother's letters again, feeling her love surrounding me like an embrace. She'd died when I was 5 years old, leaving me alone in a system that wasn't designed to care for broken-hearted children. But she'd also left me everything that mattered, proof that I was loved, truth about where I came from, and a foundation to build a life that honored her memory. The farmer who'd handed me that key in a parking lot had given me more than access to a storage unit. He'd given me my mother back, piece by piece, letter by letter, memory by memory. And in doing so, he'd helped me understand that I'd never really been alone at all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about a loved one that completely changed how you saw them? Have you found unexpected connections to your past? Share your story with our community. And tell me, what's the most important thing you're taking away from this? Until next time, remember that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms into something that can guide us for the rest of our lives. Now, click on one of these 2 stories on your screen. I promise they'll move you just as much.